Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can see me and a bit of the PowerPoint as well. Welcome to Cafe Theology, and I'm just letting you know that I'm recording this so that it can go out to people later on, so it'll be sort of edited or whatever later. And also just to kind of let you know that this evening session really is kind of part one of two. So I plan to do two sessions on this topic, and so the second one will come out in in the future. And what that means though is that if you get to the end of this evening and you feel a bit frustrated that you haven't got all the answers that you wanted to, just kind of don't worry, we will have another go at going through some really key topics. And in the chat, hopefully you can see in the chat, I've put some notes. In fact, I might redo them. So if anyone's kind of arrived in the last second or so, I don't know if I can do that now. Anyway, if you need the notes, I'll get into you in a second. Just private message me. But basically, there's some notes in the chat which I've literally just stuck in there, and they are some notes that you can follow along with, and we'll have some discussion questions. So in terms of this evening, what are you coming to? Well, I want to look at is that, you know, last summer, we had all the stuff come out, didn't it, about George Floyd, and we spent some time as a church really kind of thinking about the implications for that for us and what that looks like in the UK. And I remember one of my big surprises being that actually so many people in the UK were surprised that kind of racism exists in the UK and just kind of thought it was an American thing. But yeah, and I think right back then we took lots of time to just think about it. I remember we wrote a bit of a blog about it. We interviewed a bunch of BAME people in our community, you know, in our church, to help share their story and just help to bring light to what it feels like to be someone from a non-white background going to church in the UK and what their experience was like, and just living in the UK. And we thought that was really helpful. We recommended some books and did a few other things like that, but haven't really spoken much about the whole topic of race and ethnicity over the last few months. And so, you know, as a leadership team, we wanted to make sure we give opportunity to keep having this kind of discussion and to think about how do we develop people from all nations, not just from a kind of white middle class background, but from every class actually. So it's not just about ethnicity or race, but from every class, from every type of background, from every skin color, from every country. And we've sort of had some few prophetic words recently on us as a church about being a church that's kind of like it's like a shelter to the nations. And we've kind of seen that actually over the pandemic, lots of people coming from different nations to Guildford and have found a home with us in Hope Church, which has been excellent. And obviously with what we've been doing with Paul and Joe going out to the Middle East and things like that, we just really felt that God is doing something within us as a church to reach not just those who are local to us in Guildford, but the different nations that come to us, and also going out and you know, seeing what we can do in other nations. And so this evening is really part one, and part one of the two is really kind of thinking about with regard to, you know, not like lots of different areas, but there is a big element on race and ethnicity. Thinking about what does unconscious bias look like, what does privilege look like, what does how can we be aware of the biases that we all have in our lives, and because as we're aware of them, we're able to then overcome them and make sure that we are being welcoming to like I said, to all nations and to people from different backgrounds, from different different classes. You know, one of the things that I was quite surprised about during the pandemic was that we as a leadership team, we made sure that we put aside a bunch of money to support people that maybe lost jobs and things like that. And actually, there was very few people that are connected to our church really suffered majorly financially in the pandemic. And what that kind of, I mean, in one sense that's great. It's like, okay, praise God, thank you that you're at work and people generally have been financially secure, or certainly that we're aware of. But what it highlighted to me was, perhaps we haven't reached the classes by which their jobs are much more kind of been made redundant throughout this period, and we haven't had many people connected to us who have really who have lost jobs or had a really difficult time in terms of finding work or things like that. And so it's an area, isn't it, for us to grow in, and there's lots of different areas. All these areas for us to grow in, and we want to be people to do that. And we want to, and therefore we want to be proactive. And so this is a good way of being proactive. It's just taking the time to think about it. So in tonight's session, we'll do a couple of things. There'll be some things for you to think about. There'll be some times for you to share and feedback your thoughts. Towards the end, we'll have a breakout room discussion as well, and then we'll feedback. Okay, and we definitely won't finish past 9:30. We might finish a bit before that. So right, what I want to do then is let's start off by just setting the scene though. And we know that throughout the Bible, we've been going through Genesis, haven't we, as a church, that God's mandate has been for it was for Adam and Eve to fill the earth, to increase, to multiply, to be fruitful in all the nations, and to spread out. And Noah as well, after that kind of went wrong, Noah came out of the ark, and God gave Noah the mandate again to go, increase, multiply, fill the earth, be fruitful, multiply, go into all the nations. Abraham had a blessing to all nations. Joseph is surrounded by all the nations as they come to him to get bread and food. And we see in Joshua, they're going into the promised land, but they're told to wipe out the land. But even then, we get hints and promises that actually, God wants to bless these people. And Rahab, someone who's from from sort of Canaanite, ends up becoming part of the people of God, and we see that happening. We have Ruth, the Moabite, being brought into the people of God. Both Rahab and Ruth being part of Jesus' ancestry and being included in the people of God. And as we get into the New Testament, we see obviously Jesus example after example of him going and speaking to the woman at the well, which is a Samaritan. We got the story of the Good Samaritan. We got the banquet and feast, as all the high profile, high level, high class people don't come, but then they go out into the streets and they invite everyone in who's willing to kind of come. They want to invite in and come. And obviously Jesus, go into the nations, make disciples of everyone, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Right, really at the heart of the gospel is this message of all nations, of all classes, of all people groups, of all languages, of all tongues. And yet, throughout the New Testament, we also see the people that spent the closest time with Jesus struggling. Peter, the rock, the one who kind of professes amazing truths about Jesus, that he is the Son of God, is not so sure. And in Acts 10, God gives him a vision, and he kind of realizes, no, this really is right for me to go and to go and share with all the nations. And after he's been given this vision, he says, now I realize, after he spent 3 years with Jesus, after he's been rebuked by Paul in Galatians chapter 2, it's like, now I realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. That's Acts 10, chapters 34 and 35. it's like I've got it. All right, I've realised I really do get it. I really do believe that God does not show favoritism. He really does want all peoples from all nations to come to him. And I think having been told by Jesus and seen Jesus speak to all peoples and all nations, having been given all that authority, having seen Jesus die and rise again, having had this vision, it takes time for him to be entirely convinced, but he gets there, and it's a bit of a struggle and it's hard work. And so I think it shouldn't be surprising that we haven't always got it sorted in the church today. You know, that shouldn't be a surprise to any of us that is the case. And so that's why it's important for us to, I guess, take a kind of step back before we get into, right, what are the things we need to do. It's good for us to just take a step back and realize that this isn't just an issue for Peter. It's not just an issue for I don't know, for racists. Actually, it's an issue for all of us, because through all of our hearts runs this kind of issue of unconscious bias and favoritism. It just runs through all of us. We all look to and seek to find people that are similar to us. It's just a natural human trait that we have. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a sin issue that we have those things. It's just there's a reality, and that's why it's important for us to kind of to tackle this topic and look at it. So there's a bit of an intro. And so the good question then to ask is, what is unconscious bias? I'm just going to stop my screen share and just kind of open it up to anyone. If you want to, you can unmute yourself. Feel free to, if you want to keep your screen off, that's absolutely fine as well. But yeah, here's some, just want to get some thoughts out there. What does unconscious bias mean? Does anyone know what it is? Has anyone explored this topic at all over this last year?
Hey.
All
right. Well, so recently I just took a training for our all of ACM, and one of the things that came up, somebody asked a question and just said something about America, just out off the cuff, said something about Trump, and the person, even though they weren't trying to support it, it was just this unconscious bias. They brought it up at the end, actually, privately with me, and just said it was just an off the cuff comment. That just it was a case of like, my country, my feelings kind of thing. It's all very well, like if they were to say it, but it's the fact that somebody else said it that it makes it it just affected them quite deeply. Even if they did agree with the person, it's just the fact that people can easily say something about another country, about another race, about another religion. However, it's it can be quite upsetting to other people, but people just, because it's ingrained in our culture, maybe ingrained in our society, it can to us feel like it's perfectly fine. But yeah, that's just my experiences of unconscious bias.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, really, really helpful. Any other thoughts on unconscious bias? I can give a personal example. So the other day I went into a local petrol station, and there was a man from like Indian descent, and he kind of had a raincoat on, and he was standing and he was looking at the sweets on the aisle, in the aisle, and there was no one at the checkout counter. And I made the assumption that he was the person that worked here, and he was like stocking the shelves. And so I went up to him and said, "Hey, excuse me," I think I was asking about, I don't know, if they had any like engine oil or something. "Oh, excuse me, have you got any engine oil in this shop?" And then the guy turned to me and said, "Oh, I'm sure they probably do, but I'm really sorry, I don't work here." And then 2 seconds later, the person who did work there, that came out from the back and was like, "Oh, hello, can I help you?" And I realized in that split second, I'd kind of the petrol station I normally go to. There is a family there who kind of run it, and they are from sort of Indian descent. But I just made a quick assumption about it. I like sort of unconsciously thought that, oh, this person who's wearing a particular type of clothing and who's from a particular background must be the person that works in this store. And you know, and then I was like, oh, what do I say? You know, how do I sort of apologize? You know, I was aware of it, and trying to sort of, yeah, just backtrack and just acknowledge that actually I'd been out of order in that. It's a simple example, but it's kind of something that we do all the time. We make these kind of unconscious bias thoughts and assumptions, and you know, within seconds we will make all sorts of assumptions about someone, about what they're like, what their upbringings are, what their attitudes like, what type of person they're like. In split seconds we'll make these decisions about people, and it's worth us being aware of them, because sometimes what it means is that can build up barriers for us getting to know people. Let me give you like a definition, and that is that unconscious or implicit bias. It refers to beliefs or attitudes that are activated automatically and without an individual's awareness. Sometimes, yeah, we're just not aware of it. These hidden biases are different from beliefs or attitudes that individuals are aware that they hold, but choose to conceal for the purposes of complying with social or legal norms. So what that means is that, like, you might be aware of some particular beliefs and attitudes or biases that you have against people. You're aware for them, so you might conceal them in order to kind of comply with the society within which we live. But that is different to unconscious bias. Unconscious biases are things that we kind of are activated automatically within us, even without our awareness. And so that's why it's good for us to kind of look at this topic. And so I'm just going to play a quick video that will help us to just explain that a bit better. There you go.
The unconscious mind is amazing. It can process vastly more information than our conscious mind by using shortcuts based on our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is, it's wrong quite a lot of the time, especially on matters that need rational thinking. Here's a classic example. A bat and a ball cost £1 10p. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people, including over 50% of students at some of the world's leading universities, get the answer wrong and say 10p. The answer is actually 5p. Many of us choose 10p without thinking. This is because our unconscious mind uses instinct, not analysis. So our unconscious is fallible. It's also biased. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social and other characteristics. In milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us and belongs to our in-group. These are the people we favor. So men might favor men, while women might favor women. However, we can belong to different in-groups, and we like to be part of an in-group that's powerful, which could mean a woman favoring a man over a woman. That's unconscious bias. All of us have it, and it colors our decisions without our realizing. For example, research reveals that if I were a man, you would be more likely to be nodding in agreement right now, because people pay more attention to a male voice. The Royal Society fosters excellence in science, but this can only be achieved if we select from the widest range of talent. And that's not possible if unconscious bias is narrowing down the field for non-scientific reasons. To lessen the impact of unconscious bias, which is easier for us to notice in others, we are raising the awareness of unconscious bias to members of our selection and appointment panels. We're encouraging panel members to deliberately slow down decision-making, reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes, and monitor each other for unconscious bias. We can't cure unconscious bias, but with self-awareness, we can address it.
Okay, there you go. So that was from the Royal Society. That's just something that they're doing, and yeah, I just want to share with you just another quote, and this is from Dr. Kirk Kilpatrick. So I've been doing a bunch of just reading and looking into this whole topic, and Kate Kilpatrick, and she is a lecturer of religion and philosophy at King's College, and so she's a Christian, and she's looked at this whole area but within the church. And so she says implicit biases so permeate our attitudes and our actions that even those of us who believe ourselves to be committed to equality and justice, like Christians, may unwittingly perpetuate inequality and injustice. Since Christians are not immune to human biases, these findings present the church with both a challenge but also an opportunity. More importantly, our unconscious attitudes do not always agree with our conscious commitments. So psychologists have discovered the significant differences between attitudes at the implicit and explicit levels, particularly with respect to marginalized groups. That could be disabled groups like gender, color, skin, background, class, etc. Human beings have a tendency to think that they are more committed to ideals such as justice and equality than actually they are in practice. So explicitly, few of us would own up to being to sexism or racism, or to thinking that the rich are more worthy beings than the poor. Nevertheless, when tested on the implicit level, actually we do. And so if, like the majority of humans, if we have discrepancies between our conscious and unconscious commitments, these may have damaging consequences for other members of Christ's body, and these need to be redressed. The first step is to be aware that it is not only bad people who are unconsciously biased, actually everyone is. We all have blind spots, but at least implicit bias research and the tools that have been developed from it provide an opportunity to remove some of the logs from our eyes. And so, like I said before, that's why it's important to do a session like we're doing today. And so here's another quick activity of which you may have seen this before. So if you have, just kind of yes, don't answer the question straight away. So it's this kind of, it's a common riddle. A father and son are in a horrible car crash that critically injures both. They are rushed to the hospital. Just as the boy is about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. The boy is my son." Can anyone explain how that could be the case? So if you know this, then obviously just stay quiet for a few minutes. Has anyone got any ideas how that might be the case? Or any guesses? Or if you do know, feel free to unmute and tell us why. How?
Is there an argument for the fact that this could be something along the lines of I forgot the name of the relationship. What's it called now? Civil partnership. Is it something along those lines, or is it the fact that the dad is the dad of the dad? The two sides of it.
Yeah, you could think that. I think it's more simple than that. But you could think that.
Is it something about the father and son are not each other's father and son? So it says a father and son, and you assume that it's the father of the son.
Yeah.
But the two people, one is a father, but a father of someone else.
Yeah, it could be that, but I think it's much more simple than that.
The surgeon is the boy's mum.
Yes,
Lisa! Thank you!
Yes, Lisa. The surgeon is the boy's mum. And if I'd asked you before, can women be surgeons? Every one of us would have said, yeah, absolutely. But when presented with quite a simple statement like that, we are so ingrained in our thinking that a surgeon takes the male role that we can't possibly think that it could be the mum. And it's kind of a simple example, but it's a good example, isn't it, of how unconscious bias works in and runs through every single one of us, you know, and how that operates in us. Does anyone want to make any comments about that? Or anyone got any thoughts about that just before I move on? That's okay. That's okay. So there you go. And I shared already about it's not just like unconscious bias, like Dr. Kate says. It's not just that some people have unconscious bias and some people don't. No, actually, we all have unconscious bias, and it's important for us to be aware of that, because it just means that when we when someone comes into our church, when we interact with people on our streets, when we've just recently had 3 different sets of neighbours move into our street, and just by seeing them, not even speaking to them, just by seeing them, you can sort of make assumptions about what they're like. Are they married? Aren't they married? Are their children in wedlock or out of wedlock? What type of background do they come from? What country do they come from? Do they speak English as a first language? All these assumptions are able to be made, and they're all assumptions that have been made not out of any kind of knowledge of knowing people, but actually they're just unconscious thoughts that run through our head, and therefore it's easy to then to perhaps approach them in a different way, or to not get to know them in the way that I would do someone else. And it's not. And when we're aware of these kind of things, we can tackle them. We can say, okay, right. I've had that thought. Actually, I've made an assumption there. I need to overcome that now by going and engaging and actually getting to know the person before I make assumptions about them. And like I said, it's not a sin to have unconscious bias, because we all have it. It's good for us to be aware of it, because when we're aware of it, we're much more able to be engaging and helping of others. So just linked to all of that, then what about privilege? Can anyone tell me what privilege is? And what white privilege is? We'll tackle these both together. What about privilege and white privilege? Does anyone know? Can anyone know what these are?
How to put it in the words?
Well, first thing to say is that privilege is nothing to be defensive about. Especially the word white privilege can conjure up, and it might do for you, conjure up all sorts of feelings, negative feelings or hurtful feelings. And so I just want to say from the outset, actually, privilege is nothing to be defensive about. When sometimes we have people come around the house, and I might say to them, "Oh, it's such a privilege that you came round. It's such a privilege to meet you. Thank you so much." Like, privilege is a good thing. It's genuinely a good thing. If you go to a supermarket and you are tall, then you will be able to access everything in the supermarket without really worrying about it, or without having to think about it. And yet someone who's much shorter might have to, my wife said to me the other day, she regularly, if I'm not with her, she might have to ask people if something's at the back of a shelf on high up. She'll have to ask people, "Oh, excuse me," and she'll have to look around, and it just takes a little bit of extra effort for her to be able to reach some aspects of a supermarket shelf than someone who's taller, like myself. Now, I shouldn't feel bad that I have a privilege of height, but it's good for me to just be aware that it is a privilege, that for some people, actually, in order to access something in the supermarket, it just takes a bit extra effort, or have to think about it in a way that I don't have to. In another way that I'm privileged, so that's I'm privileged because I'm tall. I'm also privileged because I'm a male, and so at any time of day or night, I'm more than happy to walk. If I get a train and I walk home from the train station, I'm not worried about what time of day it is. If I want to go for a run, I'm not thinking about what time of day it is. Whereas if Catherine wants to plan a journey and she knows that part of that is walking in the dark, she will be aware of that and she will mitigate against that and think and change when she walks or when that journey takes place, because she knows that she's just more vulnerable in the dark. She won't go running, for example, in the dark. She's just aware that actually she's just a little bit more at risk. And I shouldn't feel bad that I'm allowed to go walking in the dark, or that I don't have an issue with it. I should just be aware that actually that is a privilege that I enjoy. And so height, I think, is a great example of that. And so is the fact that I'm male. So when we talk about white privilege, or when you hear that word, sometimes I think it can have a really negative connotations, and it has had in the press, but also on on news feeds, and you might have had a really negative experience of that in society, just in community, when you're talking to people. And I would just want to acknowledge actually that I don't believe that that it should be seen as a negative, just like height shouldn't, or being male shouldn't, or anything else that can be a privilege. But so what does white privilege mean? White privilege is basically saying that it's not saying that white people don't have problems and that people that aren't white have problems. It's not saying that some people of color aren't more privileged than some people who are white. What white privilege is saying is that for when someone who is white walks into a room in the UK, in Surrey, generally, the colour of their skin won't be a barrier to them belonging to that group. Okay, so that won't be a barrier to them belonging to that group. Now, it might be all sorts of other barriers. So class barriers, economic barriers, upbringing barriers, educational barriers. So they might have all sorts of struggles. And I know many white people that have all sorts of things going on in their life that put them at a disadvantage in lots of different arenas, like in the workplace. But what white privilege is saying is that the color of the skin is not the thing that stops that belonging. It might be all sorts of other things, but it's not that. Equally, I know people who from a BAME background who are highly privileged because of their educational status, their marital status, their economic status, and whilst their skin color might bring up some barriers, actually they overall they can be way more privileged in general than some people from a white background. But the point is that whilst a white person might encounter all sorts of difficulties in life, like and all sorts of reasons why they're not accepted into a group, like their class, economic status, educational status, location of birth, etc. The colour of the skin is unlikely to be a barrier. And one thing that really highlighted this for me was when George Floyd, when the whole George Floyd thing came up, I was really amazed that when Black people in the UK started talking about race, and it came up in a big way last summer, I was surprised that so many of my friends were shocked that it still existed today. And lots of people got in touch with me. Oh, this doesn't really happen in the UK though, does it? And so I would ask them the question, just think about what privilege have you experienced that you haven't seen that this has been an issue for many people from a BAME background for years and years and years. Because that is a privilege. It's a privilege if you've been able to go through the last decade of life and not be aware that racism is an issue, a very real issue for many people today. And you might remember that interview we did with a bunch of people from the BAME background in our church, and then just talking about the reality of life for them in Surrey, in Guildford, not just myself, but many people from all across our church. And it's not that everything's all bad. Do you know what I mean? It's not that we don't, there's not belonging, but that one of the barriers is the colour of our skin, which it perhaps isn't for someone from a white background. And yeah, and so it is a privilege to have been able to go through life and not be aware that racism is the issue that it is. But so before we continue, I just want to say that before the end of tonight's session, the aim is not to feel down, disheartened, bad, guilty, or anything like that, but actually to feel inspired and encouraged and built up, actually ready to, and tooled up, ready to, okay, right, I know I've got these unconscious biases, I know I've got these things that go on in my life, but actually I now have some things I can think about to help myself overcome these things. So I'm just gonna, in a moment, I'm gonna get you to think about things that you might have experienced that give you a privilege. But just before I do, let me share some of mine. So I am really highly privileged in lots of different ways. I'll tell you why. One is that both my parents had a degree educational background. And so whilst I was probably one of the only Black families in the school that I went to, and whilst I faced lots of racism for that, I had parents who were highly educated and then also encouraged me to go the same way. And so there's a privilege to have that kind of background in my parents. I'm also really privileged because both my mum and dad stayed together and were married the whole of their lives. And that is a privilege because I know that many people don't face that. And we also know from statistics that someone who is brought up in a kind of a secure home where both parents stay together, they are more likely to succeed in life than someone who comes from a background where there's been lots of like disruption and separation. So I'm privileged because of that. I'm privileged because I myself have an educational degree education, and that is a privilege. I'm privileged because I'm a male, and I enjoy privileges that women don't. I'm privileged because I'm tall, which I've already mentioned. So I'm privileged also because I'm married to a white woman, and that might sound strange, but a study was conducted across Black male pastors in the UK, and across them they found that those who were married to a white person felt that they belonged in the church much quicker than those who weren't. And it's almost as if, and I know this, when I'm walking around with my brothers, all Black in a black car, we are accepted in groups differently to when I walk into a room with Catherine. And it's almost as if because I've been accepted by and I'm married into someone who is white, I'm accepted in a way that others aren't. And interestingly, across commission, there are 4 Black male lead pastors, and 2 of us are married to, in fact, 3 of us are married to white women, and 2 of us aren't. One that isn't leads a Black majority church in Epsom, and the other one leads a church in Ghana. And I thought, isn't that interesting? And what does that communicate? What does that say? I don't know, but it's just worth being aware of. So why don't you take a second and think about what kind of privileges do you think you might have experienced, and if you're up for sharing some of those, that would be really great. I'll give you like a minute to think about it, and then again, feel free to unmute. If you've got any questions, you can ask those questions as well before we do our next activity.
Very forthcoming.
Okay, I'll say something. No one else is talking and it's making me nervous. I think like my mom was a brown immigrant, but I had a white dad. So I mean, I was very much assimilated into like white American culture, and I was never quite as much of an outsider as like, the brown kids with both brown parents who, you know, might have like faced racism and things like that. So I think like any racism I've faced is very like superficial, but I think I've mainly been covered by white privilege my whole life, even though I'm not, according to some people. So yeah, I think having one white parent, like really, it does make a difference. You're right. For having a partner, it does make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know that, you know, in the UK, generally people will use the term black to describe me. But when I go to Congo, which is where my family's from, they go, oh, Mandeli, Mandeli, which means white man. And they call me white. And so it's like, oh, so where do I fit? I don't know. But hey. And yeah, absolutely privileged, because you've got one white parent, and that actually helps to bring a bit of, I guess, belonging or acceptance or assimilation into a culture in a way that perhaps if you didn't. Any other? Does anyone else have it? Yeah.
Hi, Chris. Sam here. Sorry, I haven't got my camera on, but
That's all right. No, you don't need to.
Thanks. I think that was really, really helpful, and particularly the point on the vast number of privileges many individuals have, I think is a really pertinent point. So I've looked into this a lot, mostly because my job is directly related to a lot of this. And I think the point you make around growing up in a household with two parents is really significant. So statistically, yeah, of all the variables, which is approximately 50 different variables which can relate to your outcomes in life, if you grow up in a household with two parents, the chances of, you know, success in inverted commas in life is the biggest determinant factor kind of all variables. But I think you're right in terms of privileges. There are so many which you can think of individually. I was just thinking of myself, not least the ones you've already mentioned, in terms of I grew up in a household with, you know, two parents. I'm a male. One of my parents is educated at degree level, but I also live in a country which has, you know, an amazing climate to be able to grow different foods which other countries don't have. I live in a country which is one of the wealthiest in the history of humanity. You know, there are so many different privileges which we all afford, which we all have in lots of different ways. But something which I guess is just a question, Chris, and maybe a comment, is that, do you think that sometimes, whilst acknowledging that there are many privileges which many of us have in lots of different ways, do you think that sometimes it can, if we focus on it too much, sometimes that can stretch into, at an individual level, it can kind of err onto the side of kind of envy, and that actually can kind of foster within ourselves individually an attitude of, oh, I'm envious of that other person's privilege, which obviously isn't a good attitude to have. Do you see what I'm kind of saying in that regard? Because other people always have more privileges than ourselves. Like, you can always compare yourself to someone who has a privilege you don't have. Do you think that sometimes there's a real danger to actually become envious of someone?
Yeah. I mean, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1 or verse 2, it says, no, sorry, it's actually the end of chapter 5. It says, do not become conceited, envying and provoking one another. And the word conceit basically means to compare yourself to others. And Paul was basically saying that when you compare yourself to others, you will do one of two things. You will either feel inferior or superior. So you'll either you'll either envy, so you'll envy someone who you feel is better than you, or you'll provoke someone who you feel is worse than you. And so his call is, don't compare. Because when we compare, you know, often in the UK, when you meet someone, you say, hey, my name's Chris, what do you do? And immediately you're comparing their job against your job, and you're kind of weighing up, or, you know, you in that question, you find out all sorts of things like economic status, you know, just by the level of type of jobs, educational status by the level of jobs, kind of background, or, you know, societal status. And Paul kind of says, hey, don't compare. Because as soon as you compare, you basically are going to feel superior because they're in your eyes worse than you, or you're going to feel inferior because they're in your eyes better than you. And I think you're right. It's important that we don't overanalyze people. Actually, we accept everyone regardless of what their background is. I think what it is important for us to do is be aware of our own privileges, and be aware how that might come across to others, or how those things might be a barrier to others. So our language, how we help. So if we invite, so something I've been aware of is that I might invite someone around our house and put on a really lavish meal. And if they come from a lower economic background, actually that might not be the best thing to do. It might be better for me to do a simpler meal that helps them to feel more at ease, you know, at home, and like relatable on the same level. This is just one thing that I was thinking about just the other day. Oh, maybe, you know, because it'd be easy to kind of put something on that's just way beyond their ability ever to reciprocate. And if we do that, we just create a barrier, which doesn't need to be there. Hopefully that helps, Sam.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, one quick thing I wanted to share, Chris, was just about being married. I think that's a privilege, and I was single until I was 38. So I spent a lot of my adult life single, and I noticed that people treat me differently because I'm married, and I think there's quite a lot of unconscious in that, you know, people assume that I'm, I don't know, more responsible, or also having children as well. People look at me as a parent and make assumptions and treat me differently than they did as a single man. So it's not that there's not advantages in being single, but it's in certain situations there's a privilege in that marital status, I think.
That's very good. Yeah, that's really important, especially in the church. You know, if we're going to be a church that attracts people from all different backgrounds, that's got to introduce all different relational statuses. And how good are we doing that is a good question. You know, how good are we at that? How can we be better welcoming to singles and help them to really feel a part of us, help them to not feel like it's easy, isn't it, when you look at the eldership team and all the elders are married, to think that's a qualification for eldership. You know, how can we, you know, we don't want to find a token single person and put them in the eldership team, but what we do want to do is make sure that that isn't, you know, that we somehow, in the way we speak, the way we act, the analogies we use, the way that we greet people and welcome people and develop people, that we don't put an inadvertent barrier in that we don't want to. It's very good. So before we go into breakout rooms, I just want to just talk a bit about the Bible. And we've been talking about white privilege, haven't we? And one of the things that I think is a privilege is that probably across our education system, and I think it is getting better, is that it's possible to, I know when I was growing up, whenever I was shown pictures of doctors, nurses, surgeons, lawyers, accountants, bank managers, they were all white male people. Now, I'm sure that has changed, although even those kind of ideas, those connotations can still be ingrained in our unconscious bias, a bit like how the riddle about the female surgeon kind of highlighted. And this also happens though in the Bible. You know, if you this happens in the Bible, and we know, don't we, like if we really think about it, we know that all the Bible characters came from kind of northern Africa, the Middle East, the lower parts of Mesopotamia, all those kind of areas. We know that, and yet when we think about Bible characters, it's really easy for us to kind of think about them as like a white middle class Western kind of perspective. And despite the fact that these characters are predominantly of a Semitic and African origin, since the Renaissance, they have basically always been depicted as white. So there's a guy called James Lewis, who's an international photographer, and he grew up with what he described as a whitewashed Bible. And to be honest, so did I. And several years ago, James began a mission to present biblical characters as people of color. And the results of his photography, they're not precisely historically accurate, but they're dramatically closer to the reality than our kind of traditional Western ideas and images of Bible characters. And so I took a bit of time to have a look through his paintings and drawings, and I take a moment to just imagine all the different Bible characters, and I remembered seeing some of them and thinking, nah, that can't be right. I've always imagined Mary and Martha as two white women, you know, serving at Jesus' feet. And I was kind of surprised and shocked that I was kind of so against the images that I was being shown, even though I know that actually this is probably much more likely to be historically accurate than not. So what I want us to do is I want you to do the same activity, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get into breakout groups, and we're just going to discuss what we've heard this evening and think about it. And yeah, just before I say that, because should I say that now? Yeah, because it is a privilege, I guess, if you are white and you've always been shown images of white people in the Bible, then it's much easier for you to think that is what you are like. And it'd be worth us thinking, and that you can do this in the discussion groups, if you're from a non-white background and you've always seen images of white people in the Bible, what does that tell you about faith in Jesus? Like, what does that communicate to you about your place in Christianity if every single person that you see is actually of a different skin color to you? And it's just something to think about. So here we go. I'm just going to take some time. I'm going to show you these images. I just want you to take a moment. And what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to think how biblically accurate are each of these individuals. Instead, I just want you to take a moment to just look at them and think about how you feel. Just think about how you feel looking at each of these people. And if you do feel aggrieved by any of them, then that's okay, but just allow yourself to kind of go through those feelings. So here we'll just take about 5 minutes just to cycle through some of these images before we go into discussion groups. you go. So you've got some discussion questions. Hopefully you've got those in the at least one of you will have them from your group in the breakout room. I'm just going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes, just have a look through those discussion questions, have a little bit of a chat about how you just felt looking at those. And again, it's not so much about the accuracy of those pictures. Obviously they would have probably, for all of us, they've always been depicted as white. And how does that make you feel? But also what, think about unconscious bias, think about privilege, think about, does it matter how Bible characters are portrayed? What impact might that have on people who are not from a white background? But also think about other unconscious bias and blind spots and the topics that we've explored so far, and what things can we do to overcome those kind of things. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back, and that will be near the end of part one. So I'm going to pause the recording. So we're pretty much at the end of at the end of part one. Just before we finish, it would be great just to get a summary from someone from each of the groups about roughly kind of what you chatted about. So you don't need to tell me what your answers were to every single question, but just roughly what were your thoughts on kind of what we talked about? Where did your kind of discussion lead? So perhaps someone from Tim's group could share.
We didn't have the questions, but we enjoyed talking together, and we really liked the Bible pictures. And we talked a bit about trying to use pictures like that with the kids' work. And Rachel said it's really hard to get them, but we were talking about how it'd be good to get more of those. And then what else were we talking about? A bit about marriage and singleness, and inviting people over to our homes who are different from us, getting to know people who are different from us at church.
Great, cool. What about Connie's group?
So, I mean, I don't think we got the questions either, but again, we just chatted through it. Yeah, everyone's pretty happy with seeing the pictures, not seeing such a sanitized version of the Bible. But I think our main discussion was how many directions racism and bias can go in. It's not just white against black. It could be brown against black, white against white, and we talk about the idea that, bias has so many different things. You could be sexist, you could be racist, and how you need to be aware of all these unconscious biases. Because if you're against one, you're going to end up being against another, aren't you? If you're not racist, but if you're sexist, well, guess what? You're going to discriminate against Black women or something, aren't you? So just, the idea of how important it is to be aware of all bias, not just one.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful. And all of this, isn't it, is about we want to develop inclusivity as best as we can. And we're not talking about this because we're bad at it. It's just that we can always become better. And because, Christians are people, and people have unconscious biases. It's absolutely right, isn't it, for us to think about the whole married, single, different backgrounds, different genders, different things that will go on for all sorts of different people. So yeah, no, that's good. Well done, guys. And what about Alicia's group?
Sorry, I was just finding the mute button. We were talking, again about the pictures, and I said it was refreshing to see more accurate pictures, and especially in schools, you don't see that so much, and with kids' work, and if that's what you've grown up with, that's kind of what you perceive to going into adulthood. So, we all enjoyed seeing those, and we also talked about some biases that we might have, and about the riddle as well. And I think Emily was saying she works with surgeons almost every day, and even she was confused by it and thinking, oh, what could it be? And it shows that even if you're in that kind of environment, that you still have those unconscious biases and you don't necessarily notice.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, really, really helpful. So, yeah, so that's really helpful. And hopefully, just this evening, and you know, in this short sort of hour and 15 minutes or so, you've had an opportunity to just think again and just to be aware that, oh yeah, actually this kind of idea of unconscious bias and privilege and this whole kind of the racist debate, but not just that, in terms of class, in terms of gender, in terms of working background, in terms of marital background or relational background, all these different things, they can just bring up barriers for the way we communicate, the way we act, and all these things, they can be unconscious. They're not necessarily intentional. We're not trying to offend anyone. None of us is sexist, but it was hard to think that the surgeon could be a woman. And so it's just, I think it's, I think, you know, okay, we might, you know, there might be like, however many, 12 screens with us to this evening, but if us 12 like really capture hold of something from this evening and start to therefore just be aware of our interactions in a way, or be proactive in doing something to help to be more welcome in some way, then I think we're going to have a much better church because of it. And so I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to like come on this evening and to just like think about this whole topic of how can we disciple people from all nations and all backgrounds and all different environments. And so yeah, the next time we will look at, I guess in a bit more detail then, what kind of specific things can we do to respond? What does it really look like to represent all the different realities in church life? How can that really be managed? What's the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, and so on? And so yeah, really grateful. I'm just going to pray. And you know, this is for us as a church, as we grow and as we develop. I do believe we're going to have more and more people from different nations, classes, backgrounds, and we want to make sure that we are welcoming and inviting them in as best we can. So Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you so much for our time this evening, just digging into this topic. Thank you for our discussion time. Thank you, Lord God, for all the much cleverer people than me that have really studied and looked into this topic. And we just recognize, Lord God, that each of us will enjoy all sorts of different privileges for all sorts of different reasons, and therefore it's just possible that we might just unconsciously think about others in a way that can be detrimental to their belonging to our church and to our life group and to all the different groups that we're a part of. And so I just want to pray, Heavenly Father, would you help us to be a people that are just aware of those things, and when, as we are aware, that you'd help us to take steps to kind of, I guess, mitigate against those and to be as inclusive as possible. Lord God, we want to be, and we know we are, a diverse community with lots of different people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and we want to make sure, Lord God, that we are welcoming everyone in there, that all feel that they have a part to play and a place to thrive and flourish amongst us as a people. So I pray, help us, be with us, fill us with your spirit, equip us, encourage us, help us, Lord God, to step forward into our neighborhoods, into our streets, full of the Holy Spirit, inviting and welcoming, Lord God, all into our midst and into our church. In your heavenly name, amen. Amen. There we go. Thank you so much for coming along this evening.